his only loss is to Dimitri Bivol in 47 fights, which is a phenomenal record. He'll definitely bring the best out of me. I'll have to be the best version of myself to beat him.
So Chris Billam-Smith, the gentleman. So why don't we start there? The nickname, where does it come from?
It came from my coach, Shane McGuigan. I'd had a couple of fights already and we were trying to think of a ring moniker, and one day his brothers, Jake and Blaine, were having a discussion. They said, "We've got you one." I said, "Go on." Then he said, "The gentleman." And I was like, I don't dislike it. And then one of them was like, "Oh, it should just be gentleman." But I was like, "No, quite the gentleman." I think it was just because I said please and thank you more than other people in the gym, or maybe I just had a good session and was polite afterwards.
So it fits your personality more than it does your fighting style.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I like it because it's ironic. You can't really be a gentleman in the ring, and I definitely don't fight like a gentleman.
So the boxing journey for you, where does it begin?
Funny enough, there is a picture of me when I was 5 years old over on holiday over in Florida. We had a mini American boxing bag that we'd bought while we were over here on holiday, and my brother's holding it, and I had the Stars and Stripes gloves, the Stars and Stripes bag, I had the glove on, and there's a picture of me punching the bag. So I think that's where it originally started. But my middle brother, Ben, he was into boxing and started watching it a little bit with him. But then I went to college, met a friend, Dean Perkins, and he was training and boxing amateur at the time. Just fell in love with it when I watched him, and the atmosphere, everyone's there chanting his name. And that's kind of why I just fell in love with it then, just that atmosphere that it can produce, and thought that must be amazing, having all your mates there cheering for you. And then 10 months later, I was having my first amateur fight.
What about the fighting itself? Was that something you took to right away?
I had two older brothers, 7 and 9 years older than me, so I was used to taking a few dead legs and a few beatings here and there when I was being cheeky. I wasn't necessarily a troubled kid or anything like that. A few scraps in playgrounds back home, but nothing major. I love the individuality of the sport. It was something where you sort of get out what you put in, and I played soccer for many years, and you could have the best game ever and still lose the match, and that frustrated me. I like to have control over the outcome, and I felt boxing gave me that.
What was your skill level like early on? Were you someone that quickly took to the sport?
No, I wouldn't say so. I was okay. I was only 17 when I had my first amateur fight. I'd done a lot of other sports, so I kind of picked it up, but not, nowhere near like a natural talent, and very much had to sort of forge my way to the ability and to the level that I've got to.
So I read a story that it was years ago around New Year's Eve, and you got a call from George Groves, or George Groves' manager, someone in his camp, said, "Hey, we're looking for sparring partners," and you were one of the few guys available on a New Year's Eve. What happened there?
I'd actually sparred George once or twice before. He was training under Shane. Yeah, they text me at like 6:30 on New Year's Eve. I was out with my now wife with her friends, and then I got the text and I was like, "Yeah, I'll be there." And then I had to let her know that we're going to London tomorrow, which is about a two-hour drive. That was that, and I was always reliable. Every time they asked me, I said yes. It was George was my favourite fighter, so it was an honour to spar him. I never turned the opportunity down.
Why was George your favourite fighter?
It was so exciting. His jab was one of the best of all time. It really is, and having shared the ring with him and felt his jab, I can speak firsthand from what it's like.
Yeah, and you mentioned the atmospheres at fights. Two great atmospheres for those fights with Carl Frost. Did you go to those fights?
Yeah, I was at both of those. I was at the Manchester Arena. I remember it well. I was one of the few George Groves fans in the arena that night. So in that first round when he dropped him, I was up out my seat, and a lot of people in front of me telling me to sit down and shut up and whatever. But phenomenal atmospheres, and they're the fights that I've always dreamed of being in, and obviously been in a few now myself.
What did that lead to, being involved with George that early in your career? What were you able to get out of that?
Yeah, well, just being in McGuigan Gym. It's, George in there, Josh Taylor, a lot of talented fighters who are either climbing the ranks or world champions themselves. And you've obviously got Barry McGuigan in the gym. He's a Hall of Famer, absolute legend. So it keeps you very grounded. All that experience over the years, just being in that world-class setup, and where the goal is always world champion and become the very best in your weight division in the sport. And it doesn't matter who you are. That's just the level that Shane sets, and you have to hold that standard.
You mentioned goals. One of your goals when you were younger was to be an Olympian. You're working towards that goal. When you didn't make the Olympic team, how did that feel? What was that like for you?
Hard to take at first. Decided that I had to go pro. Wasn't really sure where. Obviously ended up asking Shane, and thankfully he said yeah. But yeah, it was really hard at the time, and it was a week before Christmas, so that was Christmas ruined. You know, all's well that ends well.
What was that conversation like with Shane before you went pro?
Yeah, I asked it. I said, look, I'm thinking about turning pro, and I've been sparring George quite a lot before, and I've sparred David Hay as well. He kind of went away and said, oh, maybe I'll be able to coach you on a maybe a part-time basis. I think that was kind of the plan at first, but I kind of just stayed in London and just kept training. It's been quite the journey. But at first, yeah, I think I didn't have a huge amateur background. I only had 43 amateur fights. It was a huge opportunity for me when the McGuigans took me in, and you know, the McGuigans had a TV contract. I'd fight sometimes on the undercards of Josh Taylor. George Groves got me on his undercard. I got to box on various different shows on different platforms. So then obviously got an opportunity to fight Richard Riakporhe on my 10th fight. Never really been in a 50-50 fight. He'd had a couple.
It's very early in a fighter's career to be in a 50-50 fight. Usually nowadays in boxing, you're 15, 20 fights in before you see something like that. But you were 9 fights in when you had that fight.
Yeah, that was mine and his 10th fight, to be fair. He'd taken a couple of 50-50s before me. So, it was early in my first 10-round fight. Huge experience. One I thought I'd won and still do, but it was just such a great opportunity for me to prove my worth and then just build off of that. Then obviously off the back of that, I had another opportunity to fight for the Commonwealth title off the back of it. So it was more about, you know, how you come back from it, and obviously came back well and beat Craig Glover. You
mentioned David Hay, one of the great cruiserweights of all time. Cruiserweights, kind of one of those in-between kind of weight classes that you have Evander Holyfield, you've got David Hay, you've got Alexander Usyk, of course. But was cruiserweight always kind of your goal to become a cruiserweight champion early on?
When I first started, I was sort of a light heavyweight, but through the amateurs, I grew into sort of an 86 kilo category, which we had back home, which is like must be a 185 pound. And then eventually 200 pound. And that was always going to be my weight division, you know, towards the end of my amateur career.
You mentioned Richard Riakporhe, who you did face again, and you were able to get a win in that rematch. What are the differences in you, the fighter, the first time around and the one we saw in the second time around?
Experience, confidence, but that experience, the years I think I had 10 fights in between, and been in, you know, a lot of testing fights, done a lot of growing, developed more physically and athletically. And I think just, you know, better all round boxing IQ, understanding the game, understanding how to manage fights, manage build-ups, all those things, and all that experience I'd gained from years of traveling with other fighters, but also going through it myself. It's important, and you can't take that leap too soon. So, I think that was the difference. It was at a football stadium, which I'd done. So it was a big event, and I was used to the big nights by then.
You had already won your title at that point. You'd already defended it in a pretty good fight as well. But did that win mean more to you because it did avenge a loss?
It was very, very satisfying. Now I've beat every man I've faced, and sort of felt like I'd won the first fight. So to win it so convincingly, second time round sort of scratches that out. You know, I've always felt unbeaten, although my record suggests otherwise. And, you know, that's how I feel now. I feel I've beat every man I've faced, and I've won all my fights. So it's the confidence is sky high.
When does Gilberto Ramirez kind of pop onto your radar? When does he come into your mind as a potential opponent?
When he moved to cruiserweight and he got made to fight Goulamirian, I always wanted to box in the US. He was kind of my ticket to fight in the US. Obviously now it's not. The circumstances changed, but it's a great opportunity to unify the titles. So yeah, I'd say obviously when I heard he was coming up and he was fighting Goulamirian, I wished him luck. I want him to come through because we tried to make the Goulamirian fight and it was difficult. So yeah, now here we are. It's a headline in Saudi at the time we're in on a Riyadh season card is phenomenal. We're seeing the cards pop up everywhere. Obviously we had the Terence Crawford one. We've had the Anthony Joshua, Daniel Dubois one recently. So to be headlining a show like that amongst those names is phenomenal, and it's a real honour for me. But you know, it's very much business.
You mentioned Zurdo and Goulamirian. When you watched that fight, what did you think of his performance?
I thought it was a really good performance. Goulamirian's a very very good operator, big puncher, real good short game, but he was always firing back. He had a decent work rate throughout that fight, and I thought it was a really good performance.
Is undisputed the goal for you?
As soon as you win a world title, that's it, and the steps towards that are unifications like this, and in England, you're British champion and Commonwealth, and then European champion, world champion, and then it has to be unified and then undisputed.
You mentioned the challenges of making a unification fight with Goulamirian among others. Do you think that Riyadh being involved makes some of these fights a little bit easier to make for you?
Absolutely. I think it's shown across the board. The fights and the shows we're getting now, they are probably the best consistency throughout the card, and how often they are that I've seen in my lifetime, because they're just phenomenal. If you look how stacked the cards are, a lot of the fights are headline fights in their own right, and you've got 7 of them on one card. So it's amazing what Turki Al Sheikh's been able to do, and getting promoters to work together, unifications and undisputed fights are what people want to see.
I think this fight's going to be a great showcase for cruiserweight boxing, because you're an elite boxer. We've seen Gilberto at 168, 175 prove that he's on a high level. When you think of the style, is Gilberto Ramirez's style the kind that will bring the best out of you?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's the best fighter that I've faced, and that's how it should be for a unification fight. He doesn't have any glaring weaknesses. His only loss is to Dimitri Bivol in 47 fights, which is a phenomenal record. He'll definitely bring the best out of me. I'll have to be the best version of myself to beat him.
Chris, appreciate it.
Thank you.